Hey there, folks. For this exercise, I want you to open up these two images right here. One's called manlysawimage.jpg, and the other one's called addcomposite.psd. And they're both inside the Lesson 10 folder, which is inside the Part 1 folder, inside the Project Files folder, of course. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this manly saw here, and yes, it's for ladies too, absolutely, and small children. And we're going to be taking it and putting it against this other background. For example, let me show you. I'm going to grab this saw. You can't do this, by the way. You're not ready to do this, so I'll show you how to do this in a minute. And we're going to drop it into this background window to create this incredibly seamless add composite. All right, so I'm going to undo that modification. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, whoa, what was that about? How in the world do we do that stuff, Deke? All right, well, let me show you. I'm going to bring the manly saw image to front, and I'm also going to bring my palettes back up on screen. Now, this happens to be an image I shot myself. I'm holding the saw. This is my own left hand, and I shot the image. And you might be wondering, so do your arms bend backward, Deke? I mean, how the heck did you pull this one off? Well, let me show you. Under the image menu, if you choose Rotate Canvas, and you choose 90 degrees clockwise here, or press that keyboard shortcut that I gave you, that's how I shot it. I shot the image of my own arm up in the air. It still took a little bit of contorting, but much easier than bending your arm completely backwards like that. Now, how do we go about shooting this? This is against a sky. That's all it is. It's just a digital photograph of my hand against the sky, little bits of shrubbery over here. How do we go about extracting this saw from the background? Well, we're going to do this using a few of Photoshop's very simple but sometimes very capable selection tools. Now, as it turns out, all of Photoshop's selection tools are up here at the top of the toolbox. There's the marquee tools, which allow you to select rectangular areas of an image or elliptical areas of an image. There's the lasso tools, which allow you to select freeform areas of the image. There's the magic wand tool, which allows you to select regions of continuous color. And then there's the Move tool, which allows you to move selected areas. After you get done creating a selection, it allows you to move selected areas inside of an image. You can also move layers inside of an image. Or you can move a selection from one image window to another image window, as we just saw me do a moment ago. Now, you do have to have a selection outline intact, however, before you go moving things. So we do have to select this image. And currently, it's not selected. Even though you saw me move it to a different image window, that's just because I was doing some stuff in the background. I was being crafty. In reality, we have to go ahead and select this saw. So the question becomes, how do we best select it? I'm not going to tell you how to use every single one of these tools. We're just going to use them inside the context of this lesson. So what is the best tool for selecting the saw? Well, I have very carefully made sure to photograph this arm of mine along with the saw against a very plain background, against the sky. And the sky is such a great plain background. But if you don't have a sky available to you, just shoot it against a wall or something where it's just uninterrupted, don't have anything going on. If you want to be able to select the item really easily, just make sure that your background, your sort of solid background, doesn't share any colors in common with your foreground. For example, my background's sort of this pale blue, not much blue, but just a little bit of blue. And there's no blue inside the glove, inside the saw, little bit of blue inside the blade. We'll see that sort of affects things a little bit. Now, once you've done that, once you have a plain background, obvious foreground image, as few colors shared as possible, then you can whip out your magic wand tool and select this image. And that's what we're going to do. So go ahead and click on the magic wand tool icon here, or you can press the W key for wand in order to select this tool. Now, this is a pretty magical tool, actually, because it just goes ahead with a single click and selects an area of continuous color. For example, let's say I wanted to select the yellow of the saw. I would just have to click inside of it someplace to select a very large area. Now, it might not get all of the yellow of the saw, but it'll get a lot of it. Now, if I want to add to that selection, want to select more of the yellow of the saw, I would press the Shift key, and notice when I do that, look what happens to my magic wand cursor. It gets a little plus next to it. This is without Shift down, this is with Shift down. If I press the Shift key and click, I will add to the selection. Now, this is important to keep in mind because if you don't press any key and you click with this tool, you create a new selection outline. So I'll go ahead and undo that. So Shift clicking adds to the selection. If for some reason you find that you want to delete from a selection using the magic wand, which is pretty unusual, you would press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click. And that'll delete an area of color from the selection. All right, so how do you go about selecting this saw? Yes, the saw and the hand are quite unique from the background imagery here, the background sky. But it's going to take an awful lot of shift clicking all over the place in order to, oops, that was a bad shift click, in order to try to select everything here. I'm going to be at it pretty much all day if I go this route. Generally speaking, when you're using the magic wand tool, especially if you're observing my rules so far, you're shooting a picture of a foreground subject against a very plain background, you're better off not selecting the thing that you want to select, which would be the saw and the arm, for example, but selecting the thing you don't want to select, which is the sky. The reason being, it just happens to be easier to select the sky, and you can always switch the selection around using this command right here under the Select menu, Inverse, which we will do. That just reverses the selection outline. All right, so I'm going to completely deselect this image and start over. To deselect the image, just go under the Select menu and choose Deselect, or press Control-D, or Command-D on the Mac for deselect, of course. Now let's try this again. I'm going to click in the sky to select it. Now I happen to have clicked in the upper portion of the sky. If you click in a different portion of the sky, like down here, you might select more of the sky at a time, which I do. I end up selecting this enormous part of the sky. But notice what's wrong with this particular selection. It also selects part of the saw. All right, so my little marching ants are going all over into the saw blade here, and that's bad. So we're doing a good job of selecting around the arm and the saw, but the actual blade, I should say, is getting selected. That's no good. So I'm going to undo that modification. What I recommend you do is click at the top of the sky, or if you're going to click someplace else, what we ought to do is reduce the number of colors that get selected at a time. In fact, why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's go up here to the options bar where it says tolerance, and notice that it's currently set to 32. To understand how the tolerance value determines how many colors get selected at a time, you have to understand a little bit about how the magic wand works and a little bit of image theory as well. First of all, when you click with the magic wand tool, Photoshop is identifying a single pixel on screen. You're just clicking on this one pixel. It's seeing that one pixel. It's analyzing the color of that pixel. And then it's deciding to go 32 in this case. That's the default setting. 32 brightness values lighter and 32 brightness values darker than the pixel on which you clicked. And so it goes and finds all these colors that fall into that range. Anti-alias goes ahead and softens that edge. Contiguous decides whether to select adjacent pixels or non-adjacent pixels. And sample all layers decides whether or not to use the information in multiple layers at a time. Now you're probably thinking, great, Deke, thank you for explaining that at lightning speed. I don't understand it at all. All right, let me show you. Go up to the Window menu, and I'm going to bring up this image, Gradients TIFF. And it's also inside the Lesson 10 folder if you'd like to open it with me. This is a little sort of educational example of how the magic wand tool works. Now notice what we've got here. We've got two gradients, both black to white. Black to white gradient, red bar, black to white gradient. You're with me so far, right? Now up here in the options bar, we've got a value of 32, and that's measured in terms of brightness values or luminosity values if you prefer. What are those? Well, brightness values measure the darkness or brightness of a pixel. And in case of a black to white gradient, we got 256 variations in brightness value, starting at 0 over here for black and 255 for white, and a bunch of steps in between for the gray values. So if I click right here in the center, what's happening is that the magic wand is going 32 brightness values lighter and then 32 brightness values darker. Thanks to the fact that I have anti-alias turned on, it's giving the selection outline a soft edge, which helps it look a little bit more realistic. We'll see more about that in a moment. Thanks to the fact that contiguous is on, it stays inside this gradient. It doesn't jump to the other side of the red rectangle. Let me show you the difference if I turn contiguous off and click in a different location. It jumps. See that? So it not only selects this part of the gradient, but it selects this part of this gradient, jumps over the red line. So that's what contiguous does. Now, let's see what higher tolerance values do. Let's say I decide to raise the tolerance value to 60, okay? And then I press the Enter key. Well, the first thing you'll notice is that nothing changes on screen. The tolerance setting is not a dynamic setting. That is to say, it does not affect the current selection outline. It affects the next selection you create. So I'm going to press Control D, and I'm going to click again. Now notice how much bigger that selection is. It goes 60 brightness values lighter and 60 brightness values darker. If I take that up to, let's say, 200 and press Return, and then press Control D and then try again, it almost gets, well, in this case, it does get all the pixels. It gets all the pixels because it goes 200 brightness values lighter, which includes everybody up here, and 200 brightness values darker, which gives everybody back here. However, it doesn't always necessarily get all the pixels. I went ahead and deselected again. If I click a very light pixel, for example, it doesn't really have 200 brightness values to go lighter, so it just goes darker, and it leaves out the very darkest pixels. So only if you went to 256, I think is the highest value. Nope, 255 is the highest value. If you enter a value of 255, you're always going to get everything, barring jumping over that's something that's completely, entirely unrelated. All right, so that's a little bit of theory vis-a-vis how the magic wand works. Now you get a sense for what's going on with these various controls. And we didn't really review sample all layers, but that's just inside of a multi-layer document, and it just sort of observes other layers when it's selecting a single layer. Anyway, let's go back to Manly Saw. So I'm going to change this tolerance value to something lower. Our problem is our tolerance value is too big because we keep getting the saw blade. So I'm going to press the Enter key to activate tolerance. I'm going to enter a tolerance value of 12, and then press the Enter key again. And the reason the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac selected the tolerance value is because it's the first setting inside the options bar. All right, now I invite you to click someplace. Not on the saw blade, of course, but someplace outside the saw blade. And you should notice that you get some random area of sky selected, along with not getting the saw blade selected. That's what we're interested in right now. And I should note, by the way, that I have contiguous turned on, just in case you're trying to match my results. And anti-alias should definitely be turned on for this example. All right, now at this point, we need to expand the selection into the rest of the sky. How do we go about doing that? Well, one way, of course, is to press the Shift key and click at another spot inside the sky, of course, to expand the selection. And you can fill in the gaps by shift-clicking some more if you like. But we're still going to be at it a while. With the tolerance value as low as 12, that means we're going to have to click a lot, even just to select this guy. And this can be a little deceptive. You look at the sky and you think, what a plain blank background. It couldn't be any more uniform. But in fact, this sky contains several thousand color variations inside of it that the magic wand is trying to keep track of right now. So there's a lot to select. And fortunately, Photoshop gives you a few ways to automatically expand a selection outline without having to click all over the place. Go up to the Select menu and notice these two commands right here, Grow and Similar. Grow and Similar are like using all of the pixels that are inside the current selection and clicking on them all at once with the Magic Wand tool. They both re-expand this selection based on the existing selection using the current tolerance value. Grow goes ahead and selects contiguous pixels or adjacent pixels. Similar selects both adjacent and non-adjacent pixels, so anything that matches whether it's adjacent or not. So, in other words, Grow is like reapplying the magic wand while contiguous is turned on. Similar is like having the checkbox turned off. And notice I like Similar so much I went ahead and gave it a keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-M, the keyboard shortcut that was previously assigned to switch to image ready, which is something I hate to do. I just hate to have that happen automatically when I accidentally press that keyboard shortcut. So I've got it assigned to Similar instead. And I advise you go ahead and choose the Similar command to see what happens. Now in this case, it did go into the saw blade, so that's a bad thing. So you know what? I don't like it. Gonna undo it, Command-Z, Control-Z here on the PC, and I'm gonna try Grow instead and see if that doesn't do a better job for us. You know what? I selected too many pixels in the first place. That's what happened. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep my magic wand tool. I'm going to press the Alt key, or this is the Option key on the Mac, by the way, and I'm going to click inside the saw blade and see if I can delete that saw blade from the selection outline. And you know what? I did it. So different ways to work. Just want to make sure that you're aware of all of them, of course. All right, so I now have this amazing portion of the sky selected. I didn't select some of the shrubbery up here. I got some weirdness up here as well. But it follows the contours of the hand and saw just dandily, which I like. All right, so here's where we go from here. we don't have to get the selection outline exactly right at this point. As long as it's pretty darn good, which it is, then we can modify it using other commands and tools. So at this point, the next thing to do is to find the inverse of this current selection, reverse the selection by going up to the Select menu and choosing the inverse command, or pressing Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I on the Mac. That selects the saw, deselects the sky. We now have some of this tree up here selected, some of this tree selected as well. And if I zoom in on the saw blade, I can see that I've got a little bit of monkey business going on inside the saw blade still that I might want to take care of. What are the best ways at this point, having done what we've done, what are the best ways to resolve our ongoing issues with the selection outline? Now, first of all, let's evaluate what is and is not selected. The saw blade is mostly selected here. It's just that we have some weird edges going on around the teeth of the blade. And then we have sort of a disconnect between the blade and the body of the saw. We could try to resolve that some more by Alt-clicking or Shift-clicking or whatever we got to do with the magic wand at this point. But might as well switch to a different tool. And the tool that I'd like you to switch to is not the lasso tool, which is a little bit too freeform. The lasso tool doesn't really have any constraints associated with it. The better tool for this purpose is the polygon lasso tool. Don't do what I'm about to do. I'll just show you how it works. If you just click with this tool, you start creating a new selection outline, and notice that each click creates a corner in a straight-sided selection. And as soon as you decide you want to end the selection, you just double-click, like so. And then you get this new wacky zigzag selection outline, in my case. Now, you might say, oh my gosh, Deke, you just went and ruined that old selection. You spent so long on it, that breaks my heart. Well, turns out, just by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac, I can get back to where I was. So selection outlines are undoable. And bless Photoshop for doing this. It keeps track of everything that you do to selection outlines. It knows how hard you work, so it really does try to preserve where you're at least in terms of the undo history. All right, so what do I want to do instead? Well, I'm going to press the Shift key, and notice I get a little plus sign next to my polygon cursor here. I'm going to press the Shift key to add to the selection, and I'm just going to start clicking. And once I've begun my selection outline, notice I'm kind of clicking inside the existing saw blade. That's because the edge work is already done for me. I just need to make sure that I get this area and this area down here. Once I've begun my selection, I can release the Shift key. I don't have to keep holding it. That just tells Photoshop right at the beginning of the selection that I want to add it to the existing selection. Now I'm going to click right there at the tip of the saw. Then I'm going to drag down to here. I'm not really dragging. I'm just moving the mouse down here and clicking. And then I'll double click in order to finish that off. And now I've selected this little region here that was deselected. And I think I've smoothed out the teeth a little better here. I think that'll work a little more nicely. All right, so point is you can use any selection tools with each other. So a selection that was begun with the magic wand can be finished with the polygon lasso tool, or vice versa, or any of the other tools thrown in to boot. For example, let's get rid of these trees, all this tree selection that's going on. And I'm going to do that using the regular old standard rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to go ahead and select that tool. And as you may imagine, if I were to shift drag with the rectangular marquee tool, I would add to the existing selection outline. Certainly don't want to do that. If I was to alt drag or option drag with this tool, I would delete from the existing selection outline. Don't want to do that. Instead, what I want to do is I want to find the intersection of the rectangular selection outline I'm about to draw and the existing selection. Notice the position of my mouse cursor up here. I'm going to press both Shift and Alt, or Shift and Option on the Mac. A little X appears next to my cursor, showing that I'm going to find the intersection. I'll drag to encompass everything. Notice I'm dragging all the way down to the lower right corner of the window, and I'll release. Now notice what's happened. I kept everything that was selected that's inside that marqueed area. It's as if I cropped the selection outline. So by pressing Shift and Alt or Shift and Option on the Mac and dragging with the marquee tool, I crop a selection outline. So I got rid of everything that was up here, but I still have some tree stuff that's over in this area. I will now press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and drag around that tree area to deselect it. And now I'm done. I only have the selection outline going around the saw and the arm, and that's it. So I'll just sit here, review Make sure you don't see any other little bits of marching ants someplace else. If you do, zap them by alt-dragging around them with the marquee tool. Once you get to this point here, you're raring to save the selection outline for later use. Now, if you've spent this much time on a selection outline, oughtn't you to go ahead and save it along with the image? I mean, imagine if you spent 5 or 10 minutes editing the image, of course you'd save your changes. So if you spend 5 or 10 minutes creating a selection outline, you ought to save that too. And it's really easy to do. Just go up to the Select menu and choose the Save Selection command. That brings up this dialog box here, and it asks you where you want to save the selection. You can actually save it in another open document as long as it's exactly the same size. Typically, you don't do that. Typically, you put the selection outline inside the document whence it was created, and it becomes a new channel. So you're going to put it in a channel. I'll show you what that means in just a moment. And go ahead and give it a name. So I'll just call it Saw Outline. And in our case, our only option is create a new channel as opposed to add it or subtract it or something like that from an existing channel because we don't have any other channels to work with. Okay, so go ahead and click OK at this point, calling it Saw Outline. That's all you got to do. And I'll click OK. And it is now part of the image. It isn't actually saved to disk. It's part of the image. Let me show you where it just got put. I'll bring up the Channels palette here, which is right next door to the Layers palette. See that? There's Channels. Or you can go to the Window menu, and you can choose the Channels command. The Channels palette, which is something that we're going to be talking about more in the next part of the series, the Channels palette contains all the individual color channels that go into an image. The isolated primary colors, such as red, green, and blue. Those parts of the image. And now it also contains this thing called Saw Outline. And notice what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead very daringly and press Control-D or Command-D on the Mac to get rid of my selection outline. I don't need it because I've got it saved. That is to say, I can always bring it back because I have it stored as part of the image now. And that allows us to better see what's going on here. And notice that inside the selection, where the image was selected now appears white, and where the image was not selected now appears black. And if I zoom into the image, you can see sort of this line of gray pixels. Actually, there's not many of them. Here, I'll zoom in even farther, like 500%. You can see that there's just a few gray pixels along the edge here. That is my anti-aliasing. That's my just itsy-bitsy bit of soft edge between the inside of the selection and the outside of the selection. I'll just go ahead and zoom out here, back to where we were. All right, so this is how Photoshop thinks of a selection outline. It thinks of it as another black and white image, basically, another grayscale image, where white is the inside of the selection and black is the outside of the selection. Now, as I say, we're going to see more about channels in a later lesson in part 2 of the series, and we'll be talking about these masks. That's what we've just created, is a mask, also known as an alpha channel. All it matters right now, it's just a saved selection. Now, I did mention a moment ago, it isn't saved to disk, it's just stored as part of this image. To go ahead and save this channel, to save this new channel / selection outline to disk as part of the image, I'm going to go back to the RGB view. I'm going to go up to the File menu. I'm going to choose the Save As command, or I'm going to press Shift-Control-S. And I'll go ahead and save this file inside the Lesson 10 folder. You won't see my saved file, but you can go ahead and save it inside yours as well. What you need to make sure is that you're saving this image either to the TIFF file format or to the native PSD file format, to the native Photoshop format. Either of those is going to go ahead and work for you. So either save it to TIFF or PSD, make sure that the Alpha Channels checkbox is turned on, and then go ahead and click Save. And you will have actually saved the image with its selection outline. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel out of here. Now, having gone through all these steps, how do I go about retrieving that selection outline that I got rid of? I do have the channel now, but I don't really have the selection outline intact. How do I get it back? Well, let's move the palette out of the way here. Go up to the Select menu if you did what I did and you deselected things. Go up to the Select menu and choose the Load Selection command, which is now available because you have a selection to load. And notice, it's inside the same document, of course. It asks you which channel you'd like to load. You can load only one channel because you only have one alpha channel inside the image. So Saw Outline is it. If you want to invert the selection, that is, select the sky, not the saw, you would turn on invert. That's not what we want to do. We just want to go ahead and select saw outline, invert off, click OK. And it's back. Voila. Now, we've got this great selection outline. What do we do with it? How do we put it to use? Well, I'm going to use it to place the saw into the other composition. So I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to also go ahead and close this gradient image. And then I'm going to bring this add composite up on screen. So we got them side by side. We're awfully zoomed out, but that's okay. Now I'll go back to my Manly saw image. I just want to make sure that I can see both of them for this move that we're about to do. And it's a little tricky, so we'll review it a couple of times here. First of all, go and get the Move tool. This is the tool that allows you to move selected portions of an image. So go ahead and select it, and you can get to that tool also by pressing the V key. Move the Move tool cursor into the selection outline so that you see a little pair of scissors next to the cursor. Then drag it from one window into the other. So drag from one window, drop into the other. All right, now that doesn't really line up the saw properly, does it? It does get the saw in the hand into the new image window, but it doesn't line the two up properly. All right, go ahead and undo, because I'll show you another way to work. Go back to the Manly saw image, drag as before, so drag into the other image window, but before you drop, press and hold the Shift key. Okay, so you should have the mouse button and the Shift key down, then release the mouse button, and then release the Shift key. So again, drag the selection from one image window into the other image window, press the Shift key, and then drop it in place. And by pressing Shift, you exactly register the saw into place against its new background so the two are exactly aligned. And then, at that point, we've got this perfectly aligned hand and saw against the new background. Now, I want to show you something here inside the Layers palette. Whenever you move a selection from one image to another image, you create a new layer. And look at that. We've created a new layer. The problem is, where the heck is it? Well, in my case, it looks like it dropped inside the Type and Stuff layer. That's what I'm guessing here. I've got a background layer, which is entirely white, a metal layer, which is this metallic background, and then I've got Type and Stuff, which is all this other garbage that's going on in here. Let's go ahead and expand that folder. This is called a layer group, by the way. Go ahead and expand that group by clicking on the little twirly triangle here, because it twirls open. And sure enough, there's my new layer right at the top, layer 1. And if I wanted to move it out, I could drag it to the top of the Layers palette like so and release it, and then it becomes an independent item. You don't have to do that. That's not necessary. I'm just showing you what's going on inside the Layers palette so that you know that Photoshop goes ahead and adds a new independent layer to this image. Go ahead and put that palette away. What that means is, so long as I'm still armed with the Move tool, I can still drag this independent layer to a different location, so it remains free and clear at all times, hovering above the other items. Okay, I'll go ahead and undo that movement. Now, another thing that's worth noting here is that this looks pretty darn good. Now, your selection may look this good or not so good, whatever, but it looks probably pretty darn good on your screen as you're watching this DVD. Well, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so that we can see that all is not perfect. We do have a little bit of haloing around the edge here, and a little bit of stray pixel around the saw blade as well. Some haloing up here too. And this may or may not bother you. It may be the kind of thing that you go, yeah, well, you know, whatever. Or it may be the kind of thing that you gnash your teeth and say, I must fix that. All right, well, let's assume we want to fix it. You know what the heck? Let's make it worse. Let's give this saw a drop shadow so that we can really see what's going on. And it'll also help set the saw off from its background. To add a drop shadow, go to the Layers palette. I'll bring it up on screen here. So go to the Layers palette. Make sure that layer 1 is active. That should be your new layer with a little saw inside of it. And incidentally, if you want to see bigger thumbnails, I'll go and move the Layers palette over here a little bit. If you want to see bigger thumbnails, click on this right pointing arrowhead to bring up the palette menu. Choose palette options, and you'll get a bunch of different sort of, they're actually little wizards on a palette, if you can make that out, these little guys here. But each one of them represents a bigger and bigger thumbnail. I'll go ahead and select the medium one because the ultra big one's awfully darn big. And then I'll click OK. in order to see that thumbnail enlarged so we can really see what's going on. Then I'd like you to click on this little Florin icon, this little cursive F, and choose the Drop Shadow command. Then I'm going to change the opacity value to 85%. Now, you don't have to do slavishly exactly what I'm doing, but these are the settings I'm going to enter. I'm going to tab down to the distance value, which I'm going to change to 15 pixels, and then I'm going to tab my way down by pressing the Tab key to the size value and change that to 15 pixels as well. And then I'm going to click the OK button in order to accept that change. I'll go ahead and move the layers palette out of the way. And now notice you can make out more clearly this little blue edge. Now you can really see how this edge just ain't so great. Know what I mean? So we'll zoom in here a little more so you can really see it. See, you got that little bit of wonky edge going there, and that's something that we can clean up inside of Photoshop using some common selection options inside the program. All right, so how do we go about cleaning up this edge and making it look really, really spiffy? Well, let me show you. Again, I'm going to go to the Select menu, and I'm going to choose Load Selection once again. And this time, notice that it says the document is add-composite.psd. That's a good thing. And it says Channel Layer 1 Transparency. That's what it should say. Layer 1 meaning the new layer we just added. Transparency meaning its own transparency, its own inherent selection outline. In other words, we're going to retrieve that selection outline we used in order to bring the selection into the image in the first place. Leave invert off, new selection, that's great. If you don't see layer 1 transparency, you should be able to select it from the list, but in my case, it's the only option, so it should be what you see. Then go ahead and click OK. And notice that it goes ahead and draws the selection outline right along the edge of the layer. So far, so good. All right, we want to move this selection outline inward in order to get rid of this edge. And we can move an outline inward by going up once again to the Select menu, choose Modify, and choose Contract. When you choose this command, you'll get this teensy-eensy-beensy dialog box that just contains one option. How many pixels do you want to contract the selection by? I'm going to say 2 pixels, and then I'm going to click OK. Notice it moves the selection outline inward. So this is before, this is after. So it just goes ahead and scoots that selection outline 2 pixels inward. Expand, by the way, there's another command that's its opposite right there. Expand moves the selection outline outward. So contract inward, expand outward. Smooth just smooths off the corners in a selection outline. And border draws the selection outline around the border of the object. You know, that's what they do. Now we want to soften the selection outline just a little bit. To do that, I'm going to go to the Select menu once again and choose the Feather command, which I can also get to by pressing Control-Alt-D on the PC. On the Mac, it's supposed to be Command-Option-D, but that hides and shows the dock. So it's typically easier just to choose the Feather command from the Select menu. The Feather command actually blurs a selection outline, so it softens up the edge. Now, we already have a little softening of this edge by virtue of that anti-alias checkbox that was included along with the Magic Wand tool inside the options bar. However, we want to soften it up some more, so I'm going to enter 0.5, just half a pixel, folks, just a bit of feathering, and click OK to just give it a little softness. Now, you're not going to see any difference in this selection outline here. It's going to look exactly the same, but it did make a difference. Now, one more time to visit the Select menu and choose the Inverse command. And that reverses the selection, as you may recall. So the saw is no longer selected. It's the area outside the saw. For what I want to do next, I don't want to see the selection outline. I want us to be able to use the selection outline, but not see these little marching ants. So I'm going to go to the View menu, and I'm going to choose Extras to turn extras off. You could also choose Show and choose Selection Edges to make the selection edges go away. But in this case, we could just choose the Extras command from the View menu because it's more convenient. Or you can press Control-H or Command-H on the Mac for Hide. And watch what happens. That selection outline goes away. It appears to go away. So the marching ants go away. It's still intact. There still is a selection outline here. Now I'm going to press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac. Get a load of that. So here it was before. Here it is after. That little band of coloring is gone. Now let's zoom out and see what kind of difference it's made. Actually, it's made a difference with the saw blade as well. So this is before. This is after. It does get rid of a little bit of detail, but it looks darn good. So I'll go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to press the Tab key to hide the palette. Then I'll press the F key a couple of times to fill the screen. And I might as well zoom out a little bit so that we can take in the entire image. There's my finished ad composition, complete with hand and saw, beautifully selected and rendered inside of its new background, thanks to the Magic Wand tool and the other selection functions inside Photoshop CS2.